You want me to do that again? Sounds like a donkey I had once. That donkey was the best watchdog I ever had. This is what sedated Christians say. They say things like, the world is going down the drain, so I just hope the rapture happens so we can escape. They say, God knows I'm only human, and since my needs aren't being fulfilled in this relationship, I think I'm just going to get a divorce and move on. Oh yeah, it's all about you. This is not the president that I voted for, so I'm not going to pray for him. You better pray for him, because it looks like we're all in this country together. I don't know if you got your private island, but we're all here, so you better pray. They say sex and human trafficking are tragic, but that's just an overseas problem. How sad that all those people died in earthquakes and natural disasters. I'm glad the celebrities are helping them out. Church, we have forgotten who we are. We are holy people set apart for Him and for His purposes. We are the collective body of Christ. And as such, we are destined for triumph and victory and signs and wonders. Our story of fully awake and dangerous has yet to be written. You say, well, how do I do it? Well, first of all, you begin by understanding that you are God's unique expression in the world today. Did you hear me? You are God's unique expression in the world today. I can remember when I was a young woman and God began to call me into ministry, there weren't a lot of women in ministry. There was Catherine Kuhlman. Now, I'm a klutz. Anybody that knows me, I fall over my own feet. And she used to wear these really long dresses, and she'd go, I believe in miracles. And I couldn't stop watching her, but I was like, I am going to bust it in that long dress. I was like, this is not going to work for me. And I remember thinking, God, I'd rather be like a ballet dancer or something. Why do I have to be a preacher? And I remember just saying, I want to know what you're supposed to do. And I would sing, I would prophesy and sing, and I would think, this is weird, God. Nobody does this, God. What are you doing here? And I was afraid to even come forth with what God had given me. But you see, I want to tell you, God is the most creative being there is. Why are we copying the world? The world should be copying us, because our God is the most creative God. There's no other God like Him. Wow. We are His unique expression. My son Isaac, who's 22 years old, he was born and I was only 29 weeks pregnant. And the night he came into the world, they told us, they said, he's never going to make it through the night. They said he's too little. Not only that, I had something called Group B strep, and he got it. So basically, he was born with meningitis. He had an infection in his brain. The first night, he had a massive cerebral hemorrhage. And I remember the doctor coming in and saying, he'll never be compatible with life. He won't be normal. And I can remember just crying and crying. And my girlfriend, bless her heart, she said, Marcia, don't cry. She said, this baby never had a chance at normal. He's your child. But we struggled, and they would say, he's not going to walk. And then guess what? He just got up and walked. And, I proved that name it, claim it doesn't work, because when he got up and walked, I went, you can't do that. My husband said, don't tell that baby he can't walk. I'm like, oh, he's walking. Yeah, I guess he can. They said he'll never talk. Man, that kid can talk your leg off. And there's a lot of things that, he has what they classify as mild cerebral palsy. But I realized that as I raised Isaac, I could either raise him with disability or I could raise him with ability. Those were my two choices. So I figured I'm never going to tell him there's anything wrong with him. He'll figure it out along the way. And I remember one day he was in probably the 3rd grade, and he came home from school. We had just moved. He goes, love my new school, love my new teacher, love my new classroom, but I got one question. He talks real fast. I said, what? He goes, why is everyone in my class handicapped? I was like, oh, no. I said, well, son, you know your shunt that you have? He's had 42 brain surgeries. He said, yeah. I said, well, that makes you, like, handicapped. He goes, get out. I said, no, son, technically you're handicapped. He goes, well, that's just wrong. He said, now the kids in my classroom, they're handicapped, but I'm not. I could see myself in Jenny Craig right now going, these people are all fat here. I don't know why I'm here. One day I came to pick him up at school, and he was standing up on top of the chair. He's just talking and talking. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm ready to go. And he got down, and I said, what were you doing? The teacher's like, get him to tell you. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, well, I have a small petition here. I'm like, a petition? What kind of petition? He goes, well, can you believe that the handicapped kids cannot participate in field day? I was like, oh, what an injustice. And he goes, but they're handicapped. Remember, I am not. So the principal told me if I got 300 people to sign my petition, I could be in field day. I was like, how many you got? He goes, 259. I was like, that's pretty good. Isaac has always known the things that he could do and not the things that he couldn't do. Because you know what? He is God's unique expression in the world. You are God's unique expression in the world. Don't worry with what you can't do. In fact, sometimes I think these people that have so many things, I think that's a curse to have so many gifts. Because they don't know if they should if they should cook sushi, or if they should, go play the harp upside down or whatever. These people that can skate in the dark or whatever they can do, or ski on one leg. But I only have one thing I do. I preach. So I don't have to worry about that. I just go preach. I don't have to think about if I'm going to play the harp, because I can't play the harp. God has given me one talent. And some of you say, well, I can only do one thing. Well, that just makes it easy. Just do that one thing then. Think of all these decisions these other people have to make. You have no decisions. Just do the gift God has given to you. But in order to be the unique expression of God in the earth, it's going to require courage. Do you understand? At age 25 years old, Queen Elizabeth I took the throne of her country. That country was financially and morally bankrupt. England was threatened on all sides by stronger nations who were united in Catholicism. England was split over religion. And England had become uncertain in the aftermath of the reign of Henry VIII and Queen Mary. The day of her coronation, this is what she said: the burden that hath fallen upon me, maketh me amazed. She didn't make excuses that she was a woman. She didn't make excuses that she was young. She didn't make excuses that she had lack of experience. She didn't even make excuses about her past. She would have been a perfect person to be on Oprah. Because, some of you had a mean mother. Well, how many of you, your dad had your mother beheaded? Did you know that? Elizabeth I was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. And Henry VIII had her beheaded. Okay, I know y'all had some trauma, but this is quite traumatic, this trauma. She didn't even mention it. She didn't even mention that her aunt had to take the baby when her mother was beheaded to protect her life. She said, the burden that hath fallen upon me maketh me amazed. Her astonishment moved her into the realm of total dependence on God. She had journals that she wrote, and she prayed daily. She's not like one of these movies. If you read her journals, she kept journals. She prayed in English. She prayed in French. She prayed and she prayed and she prayed. During her reign, she was betrayed. She was rejected. She was mistrusted. But she allowed hardship to fashion her into the best ruler that England ever had. She never married so that she could be the bride and the mother of her realm. Under Elizabeth, religious factions were united into the Church of England. England's economy became independent. Science and the arts flourished. England became a naval force. The settlement and exploration of America thrived. Yes. She brought her country into what was called the Golden Age. And she was called a lioness. You see, if you're a lion or a lioness, you must roar. But in order for a lion or a lioness to roar, they have to change their posture. They have to change their physical posture to unleash such a powerful sound that can be heard for 5 miles. Did you hear that? A lion's roar can be heard for 5 miles. And believe me, it makes those around them shake. But in order to do this, a lion has to change its posture. First, the lion has to drop its head and bow. If you are going to roar church, the first thing you have to do is you have to drop your head and bow. You have to know, where does your strength come from? It's not because we have lights. It's not because we have cameras. It's not because we have music. Our strength is in the Lord our God. He is the one that goes before us and does battle for us. Our help comes from the Lord and nothing else. I don't know who these dudes with hair gel think they are or what they're doing. Everybody knows. But when you're a child of God, it doesn't matter if you got on tube socks or cool socks. You are a child of God. My dad hated clothes. I mean, he just wasn't like a clothes kind of guy. It wasn't a big priority for him. Plus, he was really big and tall. That was before they had big and tall stores, so it was such a struggle. So when he'd go to the store, he'd buy, if he found shoes that fit, he'd buy like 5 pair. So he wouldn't ever have to go back to the store again. Some of you wives are punching your husbands. That's what they do, you know. And he had really strange feet, so we always had to buy really nice shoes because of his feet. And one Sunday morning, I'll never forget, he pastored Clearwater First Assembly for a while, and my brother and I were in the balcony, and my brother goes, man, those are Bally shoes. Those are some nice shoes he's wearing. I said, I know. And my brother goes, oh, my goodness. I said, what? He goes, is he seriously wearing tube socks with those shoes? I said, yep, we bought them at Kmart yesterday. He said, that man has been in Africa way too long. You must drop your head and bow if you're going to roar. After the lion drops his head and bows, he expands his chest in order to fill his lungs with air. They fill their lungs. They take such a deep breath that they feel like their lungs are going to burst. And then they roar. In order for you to roar, church, you must assume the posture of humility. You must drop your head and you must bow. Then you must fill your lungs with the fresh air of heaven. And then you must let that heavenly sound out of you. You see, our roar is not merely a sound. It is the mingling of deeds of faith and hope and love that responds to the world's needs. And when we roar, church, all other cries will cease. And the world will hear the cry of, worship God alone. Worship God alone. Worship God alone. Wow. Worship God alone. You might say, well, what does this have to do with me? You see, the Word of God says that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. You see, one day everything that you've been so busy doing is going to cease. I mean, even good stuff. We were talking about my dad today. I was talking with the pastor, and my father had leukemia. He had leukemia for 10 years. He initially had acute leukemia. He lost probably 30 pounds in a month. It was just crazy. He became so ill so quickly. He ran high fevers. And they gave him like 30 days. And God touched him. We went to Africa on a trip, and man, he was so sick. And we went to one of the feedings of the old ladies that we fed 40,000 children and 10,000 old women. And we went to one of the feedings of the old women. He could barely stand. And they were eating, they got a fish and a loaf of bread. And Mimi, who's one of the little blind ladies that was there, one of the widows, she found her way to Dad. The girl that leads her took her to Dad. She said, Pastor, I hear that you're sick. And he said, yes, I am, Mimi. And she said, I want to share my food with you. And he said, no, thank you, Mimi. If I eat, one of you won't get to eat. She goes, I don't care. God's given me enough that I can share. And she shared her meal with him, and then she laid her hands on him that day, and she prayed for him, and God touched him. When he went back home, they said, well, you have what's called myelofibrosis. It's a slow killing form of leukemia. And for 10 years, he suffered with that. By the time he passed away, he had 4 different kinds of cancer. It just spread through his body. But what was interesting was he never had any pain. I would say, Daddy, don't you want to know what's going to happen to you? He'd take the book and throw it out. He'd go, no, I don't want to know what's going to happen to me. He said, I'll tell you when it happens. I was like, don't you want to know how much pain you're going to be in? He goes, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to be the one that tells you that I'm in pain. Finally, they told us, they said, you got to bring hospice in. Daddy had been in Africa, and he said, I know that my time is coming. He'd been given a year. I was in there the day they told him. We were sitting there, and the doctor said, Doc, the cancer's gone into your throat. It's going to go right up into your brain. He said, if we were to operate on this, we'd have to remove your tongue, all the muscles in this side of your head. You wouldn't be able to hold your head up, and you'll never be able to speak again. And he goes, but you could live for 5 more years. I remember I got like this huge lump in my throat, You know how you want to cry and you don't, and it just hurts so bad. And he's like, he goes, well, I don't think I want to live 5 years. I was like, yes, you do. And he goes, look at me. He goes, look how bad I look. He goes, imagine what I'm going to look like in 5 years. He said, how about this? Can you give me 1 year? He said, I need 1 good year. He said, I don't mean like 1 sick year. I need 1 good year. He said, can you give me 1 good year? The doctor said, I think I can. I can give you mild chemo and some more radiation. You can have a year. He goes, that'll be good. He said, where'd you get your degree anyway? I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? I mean, by now tears are just coming down my face. I remember following the doctor out and saying, he's so weak. Can he endure chemo and radiation at this point? I said, if it was your dad, what would you do? He said exactly what I told him to do. He said, there's no way I'd put him through that surgery. And I remember going back in there, and he goes, let's go eat. I said, Dad, the doctor just told you you're going to die. He goes, yeah, but not today. Courage. I saw such courage in him. Inspiring, loving, giving, all the way to the end. His last trip to Africa, 4 of his best friends accompanied him. I said, do you want me to go? He said, no, honey, it'll be way too hard for you. But he said, when I come home, I want to die at your house. He said, will that be a problem for you? And I said, no, but I expect it'll be a problem for you. He said, I mean, emotionally. And I said, Dad, it's about you. He went on his last trip to Africa, and then he came home, and we spent just good days together. I'd push him around, if he wasn't strong enough to walk, and we'd sit by the pool. And man, this man had done so much in his life. 6 million people his life had touched. He'd built over 600 churches in Africa. And I remember one day I was watching him. We were outside by the pool, and I said, Daddy, are you thinking about Africa? He said, no. He said, I'm done in Africa. He said, that's the problem when you're in such a big hurry like me. He said, you get done early. 67 years old. I said, what are you thinking about, Daddy? He said, I'm wondering if I was a good father to you. If I was a good dad to you and your brother. If I was a good husband to your mom. I said, how can you say that, Dad? You're a great man. He's like, yeah, but God didn't assign any of that to me. He said, God assigned you guys to me. And he said, you promised me one thing. He said that whatever you have to do, you're going to meet me at the throne. He said, I don't care if you quit the ministry one day and flip burgers, because the ministry's tough. But he said, you meet me there, and you make sure you drag your brother there too, because he's a tough cookie. I said, I will, Daddy. That night, we had men that came in, and they liked to lay on the bed beside his bed. But that night, I just had a feeling. I said, I want to spend this night with Dad. I want to lay on the bed beside him. Hospice had come in, and Dad had been in Africa so long, he didn't know what hospice was. So I had to go in there and tell him what hospice is. He goes, what's hospice? He said, I know they do something, but I can't remember. I said, it's for people that are terminally ill. He goes, do they think I'm dying again? I said, yeah. He goes, they've thought I was dying for 10 years. I said, I know. And he says, sure, if it'll make it easier for you, bring hospice in. But that night, I spent the night with them, and in the middle of the night, I felt like someone was staring at me. Did you ever have that feeling? And I woke up, and there he was. He was sitting on the side of his bed, and he was just looking at me. And I said, Daddy, are you okay? He said, yeah. He said, I just wanted to watch you one more time. He said, I was the first face you ever saw when you came into this world. He said, in that mud hospital in Africa, they let me go into the screen surgical room. And he said, when they took you out of your mother, he said, I was the first face that your eyes beheld. And he said, I've watched you every day since then. And he said, I just want to tell you that if there's a way, I'll still watch you from heaven. He said, because I can't keep my eyes off you. And he said, by the way, I know you never have any money, so the secret compartment in my wallet, there's $100 in there. I said, Dad, I have money. He said, I know you have money, but you never have any money. I don't. And he said, when I die, you're going to have to travel, so you're probably going to need some money. Look at my dad providing for me even in his death. That night, the next night, I went to church, and he said, come back soon. Please come back soon. I had to lead the song service. I wish that I had not gone that night, but I had a responsibility, and when I came back, he'd gone into a coma. Early the next morning, my mother-in-law was staying in there with him. She called me, and he was in my African room. I had a room that's all decorated in African things, and that's where he was, surrounded by African pictures and African fabric. And they said, it's time. He was breathing kind of strangely. We rearranged the pillows. I went to sleep for a while, and then they said, it's time. I remember I crawled right into the bed beside him. And they said, he's waiting for you to tell him he can go. And I said, well, I'm not going to do it. They said, tell him he can go. Seriously. I I said, okay, Daddy, you can go. I said, you go. You fought the good fight. I crawled right up next to him and I held him in my arms and I began to sing that song. I just want to be where you are, dwelling daily in your presence. I don't want to worship from afar. Draw me near to where you are. I want to be where you are, dwelling in your presence, feasting at your table. And I got to surrounded by your glory. And he sat straight up right out of that coma and he went, and I don't know what he saw, but that is the most impressed I have ever seen him in his entire life. And he just breathed out for like what seemed like 5 minutes right in my face, and then he laid back and he was gone. But let me tell you what, the anointing that came into that room was unbelievable. You could just feel the presence of God. And I mean, everybody looked at me, they thought, she's going to lose her mind now. Because he and I were so close. And, you know, the only thing that would come out of my mouth was that song, I will bless the Lord at all times. And I just stood back and I just blessed God for his life and for his courage. For the way that he had roared. Several months before, Apostle Nolan Ball had invited us to his church, and he said, bring your whole family. And we really didn't know what it was, but they had planned a service in honor of my father. The whole service, the choir had written songs, and I mean, they did different things for him. And I'll never forget, this guy walked up to my dad as he was sitting on the stage, and he said, the Lord showed me a vision. And he said, you have been a lion. And he said, you have roared your roar in Africa for almost 50 years. But he said, in the vision, I see the old lion. And he lays down. And he puts his head down in death. But he said, as soon as your face hit the grass, he said, hundreds of little lions sprung up, and he said they began to roar, the same roar that you have roared for 50 years. He said, your roar will go on, Dr. Lovick. You see, we must be courageous. And we must do all that God has called us to do, church. I can't think of anything sadder than standing before God and him saying, if only. I often say that cancer is a gift because it made me realize that I'm not going to live maybe as long as I thought I would. It makes you do the stuff on your bucket list. It makes you run with gusto. And I want to challenge you tonight to accomplish everything that God has put in your heart.